Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the next battle. I am very excited to have my guest Bloodhawk here with me today. I know that we've been planning this episode for a while, and like I said in the last episode, unfortunately got a bit off my content path, but I'm very glad to make this happen now. So, Steve, just starting off here, could you tell everybody where they can find you on social media, just so as we get into our conversation here, they can follow along, see any sort of content that you put out?
Yeah, I have my Twitter at bloodhawk_, which is where I spend most of my time. Sometimes I bring out some tech and stuff. Sometimes I post pictures of my dog. Sometimes I just post random stuff that I'm doing. Really, just use it as my personal Twitter page more than any sort of like brand or anything. So if you want to follow me there and just see what random things come out, that's always fine. I got a YouTube, Bloodhawk TR. It's been kind of defunct for a long time. I haven't really put out any like specific 7 content, but I did had my most popular video there was the how to punish get up kicks video that I did early on in 7. I feel like a lot of people didn't know specifically how to punish wake up attacks from certain positions. So that's actually my most popular video, and I might make a redone version of it when it comes. And then besides that, I don't know. Find me on Discord, Bloodhawk. What's my number on Discord here? Let me click my thing. Bloodhawk number 1016, I think it was. But you can always just at me on Twitter DMs or whatever if you want to get in a more personal touch.
Well, I think most people would have probably seen you on commentary desks, and I'm sure we'll get into that a bit. But just to sort of, tell everybody who you are here, could you tell me a bit about your early experiences with Tekken? And I know that you've played quite a few of the games, so just sort of how you got your footing in the competitive scene.
So I started with Tekken 5 in the arcades, which, if I'm remembering correctly, came out in my arcade in December 2004. So we're going back like 18 years. And I was about like 17, I think, in high school. I'd already been going to my local arcade for quite a bit. I'd just been playing other games. Like I played a little bit of T4. I was playing CVS 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, a little bit of Guilty Gear, just traveling between the cabs. So Tekken 5 had come out, and I played that for a little bit. And when it first came out, just casually, just being a scrub, pressing buttons with Horong, just seeing the cool moves come out. Like I think a lot of people start with their favorite fighting game. They just try to do cool moves, and they don't care about like frame data and combos and stuff. Unfortunately, a couple of months after that, my mom passed away while I was in high school, and I had a lot of a lot of like negative emotions, not knowing how to deal with it, not knowing how to grieve properly. So I just kind of put all of my negative emotions into getting better at Tekken. Because I felt like, instead of there's 2 choices. Either I was going to start fighting people out in the streets for real, or I could just try beating people up in this video game and just try to work through all my negative emotions that way. And that's how I just started trying to get better and just started beating people, winning more consistently that way. And I guess the arcade scene back then is a little bit different. Like people talk about a lot of things about the way the arcade scene used to be, but my personal experiences was when I first started going to my arcade, nobody talked to me, nobody cared about me, nobody did anything. You just walk up to the machine, you put your token in, you try to win. If you lose, you either walk away or you try again. If you win, sometimes the other guy walks away, whatever. You just play. And after about maybe just a year or so, like I had been going for a while before Tekken 5 came out, but like a year or so, you start seeing the same people. They start seeing you. They start recognizing people, but you still don't really talk to people. You try to just see the person that you see, and you just give them like, "Hey, what's up?" Like that kind of thing. You keep it moving, or you just like you see somebody that you normally play at your favorite machine, like your favorite game, and you're like, "Oh, it's the random Asian dude that's always here." You don't even know his name, bro. So you just know him as the Asian guy, and you go, "Hey, what's up, man?" And then you play, and then you play each other characters, and then one of you like wordlessly leaves at some point. And that's the relationship. And then eventually, over time, you start hanging out outside the building or something. You like have smoke or whatever. Start talking with people, and that's how the relationship. But for me, that was like a really slow process. Even with the people that I was playing consistently at local tournaments and stuff, it took a long time before I actually started talking to people and having conversations. But eventually, I just started making friends, making acquaintances and stuff, and just really starting to become a member of the community like organically instead of just trying to like force it or something like that. But that was the early stuff, and then I played locally for a few years before. By making those friendships, somebody told me, "Hey, we're gonna go to Virginia on Saturday to go to a tournament at their local arcade. Come?" And it's like, "Oh, how are we gonna get there? We're gonna take a bus or we're gonna drive or something like that." And that's when I started traveling, like 1, 2, 3 years into me playing, and momentum goes from now, and now I'm where I am now from those humble beginnings, I guess.
So in terms of like those early instances of traveling for tournaments, how first off, how did it feel to start like recognizing yourself as a competitor rather than just someone going to an arcade? And also, one thing that I would kind of want to know is what were the first tournaments that you were flying out to as well?
I didn't fly out to anything until maybe, well, I guess it doesn't. That's the one that's a big outlier in Tekken 5 and DR was the time in DR. So that was around 2007. Was when I qualified for Super Battle Opera in Japan, which was their big annual one of their big annual tournaments. And if you don't know what Super Battle Opera, also known as Geki, it was a single elimination tournament, and depending on the games they had, they would either do singles or 2v2 or even 3v3 teams. So you would normally you would qualify with a team, and they would have a couple of spots that they would give out to local like arcades in the US. So like you'd have like one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, or even one in Texas, because Texas had a couple of arcades too. And I qualified that year, and that tournament was really weird because instead of entering as a team, the event did 3 separate singles tournaments, single elim. And so the 3 people that won basically formed a team. It's a little bit weird for like team dynamics and camaraderie, but it was really weird because the team that I ended up qualifying with, I ended up winning the second of the 3 tournaments, and my teammates ended up being Mr. Spiro Jin and Mr. Naps, aka Jimmy J Tran, and that was our team. And I knew Spiro because he was one of the local guys, and he was one of our people that would win tournaments around in Long Island and in the city. But that tournament was the first time I ever interacted with Jimmy before, or even seen Jimmy. And us going to Japan was the first time we had ever hung out. So it was really weird, interacting with somebody that I was going to enter the tournament with. But in terms of America traveling, I didn't really travel anywhere until Tekken 6, which was I went to Evo. That was the first time I went to Evo, and when MOG was doing their Tekken 6 circuit, I went out for a bunch of those as well. So I definitely stayed more or less in my region during my early times of Tekken 5 and Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection, which would have late 04 into like 2008, I guess. So yeah, I wasn't even on a plane until like late 08, 09, I guess.
So in those early years, was there a bit of a shift from thinking of yourself as just someone who goes to an arcade and trying to improve in the game to being a competitor and like recognizing, especially being able to travel internationally like that? Was there any sort of dynamic shift there?
There's definitely a dynamic shift in terms of the locals, where it's like, okay, part of me entering tournaments back then was again to like just have something to do. I was just trying to ignore dealing with, especially early on, ignoring a bunch of the feelings I was feeling with losing my mother. But entering tournaments, I just tried to have like really like objective feelings about how I was doing. I was like, okay, we're going 0-2. Let's not go 0-2 over and over. Let's go 1-2. Let's go 2-2. Let's stop losing to this guy that we lose to this guy in tournament, but I beat him whenever I'm playing at the arcade cash. Those kind of little things. And eventually I started beating certain people consistently and losing to other people consistently, having dynamic progress. And getting better was part of the reason why certain people that were better were starting noticing me. Like I would start people like Spiro Jin, and he lives in Texas now, but another guy that, taught me how to play early on, the Realist, Julia player. He was originally a New York guy, and he was very stoic and didn't talk to a lot of people, but every so often he'd be like, give me some advice or invite me over to his house to play. Took time that he didn't have to like try to help me get better. and a bunch of the OGs at a time that are no longer around. The OG team back then was just called TNY, Team New York, and it was a bunch of just dudes that were old, black dudes that were older than me and are really tough looking and played a lot of interesting characters. But if you showed that you were interested in getting better and you weren't like a whiny punk, they started to open up to you and it's like, hey, what's up, dude? What's up, Blahawk? Like, what's up, Hawk? Like that kind of thing. And eventually, one of those guys said, hey, you want to come out with us to the regional tournament and you want to see how good you are compared to people that you've never played before. Because I feel like that's the big test. Like, especially if you think that you're getting stuck in your local scene or something. Sometimes it's just as a matter of like, you're just playing people that know how you play. And the way that you play might transfer better to people that you've never played before. So it could be a different test of like, okay, am I really good or bad? Or is it just that, I've figured out people here or if they figured me out. So went to Virginia, I think, or Jersey was another time that we would go to. Jersey had, or still does have, 8 on the Break that used to have arcade machines. And I got kind of similar results to how I would be back home. Like I went like 3 or 2 or 2 and 2 in the bracket. And that's when I started feeling like that regional kind of pride where it's like, okay, we're a team. We want to try and fill out the top spots of the standings, no matter who ends up winning. Like it wants to be like, I want to take out a couple of their guys, especially if they're pretty good. So I think that idea of personal and regional pride is when you start turning from a player to a competitor, when you start getting really invested in the results instead of just playing for fun. Was definitely for me the moment where I was like, okay, I'm playing this seriously now. Now I'm not just playing it for fun and games.
For sure. And, as things go on, and I don't want to be too broad here, but as, different games came out over time, going from 5 and DR to Tekken 6 and then into Tag 2, how did you notice the community and in particular your region growing? And were there any sort of like common trends that you'd see from game to game in terms of like new opportunities for competitors or just anything in general like that?
It's hard to remember going so far back, but it's definitely the idea, like, every game that will come out there, you'd see a few new. It's always the case of every new game where like you get new faces and then some of the old faces go away over time. But definitely over time, the game has grown little by little. Tekken 7 is the biggest outlier in terms of explosive growth, where it's like, a big tournament back then, we would get like 80 people or even like 50 people at our arcade, right? And, nowadays, like even 30, 40, 50 is just like a big local in terms of Tekken 7 in terms of that. But the competitive scene evolving, just people just get better in terms of like the general fighting game scene. Like people get better at breaking down the games. People get better at kind of understanding the general concepts. Like the idea back then, like when certain moves beat each other out in certain situations, like the big thing that you'd throw out the idea was like the word like priority. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you out prioritized my move and stuff, because a lot of us didn't understand the idea of frame data. Like, oh no, I just hit your move like one frame before your move became active and stuff like that, or the crush system. Even then, like, no, people didn't really understand the intricacies of the crush system, so people thought it was random. And nowadays, we have lots of frame data and a lot of them are understanding about stuff like that, where it's like, no, the move is going to beat your high or low at a specific frame, and if you can frame trap it, it's not going to work. Like a hop kick on 9th frame on a hop kick, right? If I can hit you with my low in the first 8 frames, your hop kick's not going to work. We didn't really understand that back then. We kind of like understood through trial and error, where if I do the low in this specific situation, it's not going to work, but we kind of didn't really. A lot of us didn't really break it down that way in terms of hard numbers. And I guess the biggest thing in terms of fighting games in general, not just Tekken, is just like people are more willing to like share information really fast. They'll find something now, especially nowadays. They'll find some weird trick and setup, and it's immediately on YouTube. Where back then, if somebody found a setup with their character, they didn't tell anybody that stuff. They held it for multiple tournaments. They would try to beat as many people and win as many events as possible with their trick, you had to basically record the match, which is another way. I'll get into that right after. You had to record the match and then bring it home and watch it and try to replicate it in the practice mode in the game. That was way crappier than the practice modes we have now.
Right.
Like oh god, if you can open up
like Tekken 6 practice mode in specific, that one was fairly bare bones, wasn't it?
And that was better than the Tekken 5 practice mode, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. But yeah, you had to try to replicate that situation probably with your friend, because again, I don't remember Tekken 6 having like recording capture. Tekken 5 definitely did not have recording capture. I don't remember if Tekken 6 did. So if you wanted to practice a very specific setup, you probably had to call your buddy over to your house and be like, okay, I'm going to do this specific thing, and I need you to like mash here or sidestep here or block here, and you had to try to figure it out that way. But nowadays, people just throw that stuff up, and then you'll tweet in a comment like, how do you beat this? And then half the time, they'll just tell you how to beat the setup that they posted. People are way more forgiving and open with sharing knowledge that way. And then just getting access to match videos. Like back then, even up until Tekken 6 when Spooky was streaming on the West Coast, the main way you got match videos was somebody was there at the tournament, standing behind the two guys with some phone camera or even like a digital camera just recording video. And God forbid if his memory card ran out of space midway through the set, or if his battery died or stuff, because you just lose a match halfway through, or you just watch match videos. And back then, like because of CRTs, the arcade monitors or CRTs back then, you get the infamous like black band that's just moving up on the recording. So yeah, we've gotten so much better in terms of just having access to information, being able to record and preserve tournaments and match footage, the general mentality of just understanding the game. Like it's like we've evolved as a species as fighting game players. So back then, like even like Tekken 5, I want to imagine we were Neanderthals. I can't even imagine how people were in games before that, like Alex Valle and people playing like Super Turbo back then, just trying to fundamentally understand the game. And like where we've gotten to compared to where we are, it's like we've landed on the moon at this point. It's like it's crazy.
So in terms of seeing that growth and progression, and especially players who have been able to fully utilize these newer and more thorough like training options and things like that, and really just soaking up all that knowledge, who would you say in your region have you seen as relative newcomers that are like really challengers at this point to the throne? And by contrast, who would you say you don't quite see as much anymore? And this is mostly in your region, but just in general in the game as well.
I mean, nowadays New York. It's been a long time coming, but I'd say New York finally has a really good crop of newcomers. Like we got Fear, we got Justin, we got Ukio, Eddie. Even though Eddie left for ATL for a while and then came back. A lot of that I attribute to Helst with NYC Tekken, just fostering a new environment for people to come out and play and compete in and feel comfortable in. But those three off the top of my head, and then you got even more. We got Flubs, even though Flubs moved to Pennsylvania now. We got dudes from Long Island, like Eddie came out originally from Long Island, but a lot of the MTS guys, Hazel. A bunch of strong Be Rich, like a bunch of dudes that even though if they're not playing now, I feel like they'll be back at some point, even the ones that have left temporarily. But that was a long time coming. Like I said, I started with Tekken 5, and I've tried to stay relevant and succeeded to an extent over the course of multiple games at this point. But NYC Fab started around the same time I did, and he's around, but he doesn't travel as much, so you can say as if you know Fab, you know how good he is, and you know he's still in the wings lurking, but he just doesn't have the time to come out to compete in events very often. And obviously GM is another one, and GM, for his reasons, I guess, have just chosen to stay at home and be a streamer and to be a content creator. And that's fine for him as well. But, in terms of just falling off in terms of the competitive scene, you have to say, like, if he's not coming to tournaments, obviously people aren't going to think about him in that context anymore, right? You could be a strong player, but if you're not a tournament player, then people don't think about you in terms of the competitive scene. And then obviously I got my boy Reno that showed up in Tekken 6, and like me, he's to an extent managed to remain competitive. But from Tekken 5 to Tekken 6, it was basically we had a bunch of new people show up, and I guess Dancer is another one that showed up in Tekken 6, but he more or less has fallen off by the wayside. Again, I'm sure when a new game comes out, we'll see more of him again. But besides those two, through Tag 2 and a bunch of stuff, we were struggling for new people in the scene. And then Tekken 7 came out, and now, like I said, Fear, Uki, Justin, Hazel, B Rich, we got a bunch of strong new players in the scene now, and sort of raised our profile again in terms of like the regional scene and the national scene because of that.
Yeah, I know that it was pre-COVID when I had spoken to Helst about an article for just, talking about all of the NLBC events that were going on, and with really growing NYC Tekken, seemed like there was definitely sort of a renaissance going there. And I'm really glad to see that, things have pretty much stuck. I mean, I know that there's even people like Ty who, drive
Yeah.
quite a distance to get there just because it's a really good, I'd say, like kind of melting pot. I don't know if you'd put it that way quite, but just a really good training grounds for a lot of players who then go and are able to represent the region. So it's nice to hear about that sort of rejuvenation of the scene. But I know
Yeah.
that alongside competing, you've also been very active in commentary. Could you tell me a bit about how you got started in that and how that's gone for you?
I mean, honestly, the way I started in commentary was like I said earlier, the first person to start streaming regularly, I would say, on the East Coast, just streaming events, streaming tournaments at bigger regionals and majors was Spooky, and you'd be streaming a top 8, and back then commentary was something that nobody wanted to do. Everybody was like, comment to get on the mic. Either maybe they were embarrassed or shy or whatever. So I started doing it because, for the most part, nobody else wanted to do it. I was just like, okay, fine. I'll sit down and talk about the game. And man, that early commentary was rough. I will admit I used some terms and said some things that I do not enjoy listening back to these days. It's a sense of embarrassment and a little bit of disgust at how young Hawk would say things. But and then the commentary itself was kind of whack too by today's standards, just very cringy and annoying to listen to. But yeah, that was the thing back then. Like, it's different the way now, where it just feels like a lot of people want to do commentary just to do it. But
More the production value that's definitely there now.
yeah, and there's production value, but I think on the individual side, I think like a lot of people. It used to be that you did commentary because you were a good player, and then you could add some sort of informational value to what's going on, while also like trying to be entertaining. And on the West Coast, obviously, you had Eris and Steve and Rip, and they were the ones that were really ahead of the game when it came to being entertaining while also being informative. Eris, I think, is still the gold standard of balancing being entertaining and being informative and slipping that in. But back then, that was the part where I was struggling with. I could be informative, but man, I was not entertaining at all.
Right.
And that was the part. It was like being a competitor, being a player, being a tournament player. It's like you really had to look at like, what am I lacking here, and how do I get better at this? How do I get better at being entertaining while still trying to convey the information that I convey? And like being a competitor, you got to watch yourself back. You got to watch match footage. You got to watch other commentators that are good from other stuff. Like I would watch Eris in other games. I would watch like Ultra David in Street Fighter, that I think is another one. I would watch more recently in like within the last 5 to 10 years, I'd watch like Ketchup and Mustard for MK. Both those are also guys that I think do a really good job of being informative and entertaining, and just getting better and trying to practice, get better and stuff. And it took a long time. Like I say, I wouldn't think I really hit my strive, like my modern version of what I am now, until like 2017, 2018, where I really just like kind of figured it out, like what I wanted to be. And it's like I was trying. I would say like before that, I was trying to be more reserved about not being excited about the game that I liked, because I thought it made me feel like a geek, like
Right.
being a nerd. I was like embarrassed about sounding like a nerd. And then after a while, I was like, just embrace being a nerd. You're excited about the game. your whole point that you want to do commentary is that you think the game is sick and you want to tell people like the way I describe my commentary now is like, man, something sick just happened on the screen and I need you to understand why it was sick. Why this guy moving, stepping in this situation, like why this move hitting in this situation, like bro, this seed was planted 2 rounds again. And I need you to understand how cool it was that this guy incepted this other guy to make this setup work and this stuff. And the challenge is conveying that feeling in as few words as possible, because you got to talk about why something was sick before the next sick thing happens. And you can't, you got to be able to like, give up on a thought because something new has happened now. Like you're like there's definitely been times in commentary where it's like I'm trying to explain something and I'm like, you know what, forget it, I'll talk about it later. Something new is happening right now, we got to focus on that. And it's like, it's juggling the plates of commentary is one of the coolest things that I've learned how to do in terms of doing that. And where I started to where I am is like, again, another thing where it's like, man, I cannot believe listening to my old footage. Like, I can't believe I was that bad.
Right.
I can understand that I was that bad, but it's like, where you are to where you are now is like, it can, especially if you think that you've stagnated as a player or you just don't think you can get better. I think it's very important to think about where you were, where you are now, and look at it as a sense of pride. Like, look at all this progress I've made. Of course, I can continue to get better.
Certainly. And I really find it fascinating to hear you say that you've listened to commentators in other games, because I feel like that's something that is probably pretty unique to commentary, and that, like, obviously you can't really take too much from, say, a 2D fighting game and implement that to 3D gameplay. There's just, a bit of a divide there. But in terms of like listening to the flow of commentary, and I suppose that I should sort of add an addendum, because you can definitely watch for like how players read timings and things like that, but not, I feel like you can definitely get a bit more into it with listening to the commentary and how that's delivered. But yeah, I found that really interesting to hear.
Another thing is that I don't do this as much. I should go back to doing it, but listening to very good sports commentary, like actual sports commentary, like listening to really masters of the craft in that, because I've fallen off on this for a while, but for a time when I would do like play-by-play commentary, I wanted to like kind of emulate that idea of like that radio sports broadcast feel where like for a time I was like, I want to be the guy where it's like you could not be watching the stream, but you're just listening to my voice, and if you were good enough at the game, you could like picture in your mind what was happening on the screen. That kind of like, because like radio sports commentary is a different beast from TV. Like they have to really explain what's happening on the screen so you could like visualize it. And I think it's another part of commentary that gets overlooked or underappreciated to an extent.
Yeah, really being able to just paint that mental picture. And I think it's definitely something that, actually, one of the things I was thinking about as you talked about Eris being sort of that golden standard is how I remember, I think it was on one of his streams, he talked about how sometimes he would just shorthand things instead of saying like down forward two to say like uppercut, and just painting that better mental picture. But that's one of the things that personally, as I listen to commentary moving forward, I'm going to try to listen for. Because just like thinking about things like that is definitely things that I don't think players or people in, say, my position, that I'm not a commentator, I'm not thinking about that. So it's definitely refreshing to hear about that sort of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of just how the game within Tekken 7 has evolved, I feel like everybody pretty much has to, almost at this point, split it up between like pre-COVID times and post-COVID times. Could you tell me a bit about how you were feeling during that year or year and a half stretch of where things really slowed down, and just where was your head at regarding gameplay and regarding commentary and just your future and aspirations within Tekken?
Oh man, COVID time was definitely a mixed bag of emotions for me. Like, because for me, fighting games have always been about offline interactions. Like, not even just like the tournament, just like what you do between your matches, before your bracket starts, after your bracket ends. Whether you drown in pools or you get out of pools or even win the whole thing, right? Just like the like hanging out with the homies, just grabbing some food, grabbing drinks, being up late in the hotel rooms. All of that is part of the offline experience of fighting games from that. And then when COVID happened and I'm stuck at home for weeks and months on end, it's just like I always looked at net play as a means to an end. Like you play net play to get better so you can perform offline, and it was the only thing. It's like really not my thing. Like Like, if anybody was noticing, I was not doing anything competitively for COVID. I entered like maybe one or two online brackets, wasn't really feeling it. Still net played. I mean, I just ended up doing things that I just hadn't done before. I tried just picking up new Tekken projects. Like, that was when COVID is when I started learning how to play a Mishima. I played Heihachi. I switched to Korean lever. So if people were wondering, why does Steve play Heihachi now? What happened to Leo? What happened to other stuff? COVID, I just learned. I was like, you know what? Never seriously learned how to play a Mishima or anything like technically intense like that before. So, let me learn. And then I learned and I got good at it. And I ended up picking up a new main character, adding it to the roster. But commentary style, again, I guess online commentary is way easier for me than being an online competitor because I still enjoyed watching the online events. Like, for the players that dove into it and took it seriously, obviously that level of competitive drive and skill is still on display despite the jankiness and the unpredictability of online connections. Those competitors are still just as competitive as any online competitor. Like, and the people that came out of that and flourished in that and got real good at that, Fear, Ty, Joe Crush, FDX, Trojan. I'm missing so many people in that, like Shadow was still super strong before COVID, so I'm not. But then Joey, like all these people that just, despite their apprehensions and despite the obviously valid criticisms of online play, these people were willing to just dive into the fire and compete day after day and week after week. And, even though it wasn't for me, I cannot deny that the fact that you could be at home in quarantine and be entering a different online tournament every day or even multiple on the same day really contributed to having these players, get so good. And now these names that a lot of people did not think about pre-COVID, like Joe Crush, like FDX, like Ty, like Fear, now they're household names in terms of the North American Tekken scene, right? Mm-hmm. So even though online play wasn't for me, I cannot deny the positives that it had on the scene. I'm just like,
right.
Obviously not for me, but yeah, it's not for me. But you guys did what you did with it, and I can't deny that. So
now, in terms of sort of post-COVID time, once tournaments actually started back, did you have any particular aspirations about how you wanted to approach things? Were you just sort of trying to smoothly reintegrate into that like offline competitive scene? Because, like, for instance, I didn't even know that you had just started playing Heihachi during like around that period. So did you have any particular goals of like how you wanted to interact with the game or ramp up commentary or competitiveness?
Honestly, obviously it's always like, let me see if I can be always better than you were in the last tournament or do something a little bit better or work on commentary to a little bit extent. Like COVID commentary, I'm going to shout out like a bunch of people that gave me opportunities. Like I ended up doing something for Combo Breaker when they were doing I forgot, what was the name of the Combo Breaker series that they were doing online, like the exhibition events? It had a name, and I'm not remembering it off the top of my head, unfortunately. But
I remember wanting them to call something COVID Breaker, but that never happened. But it was I feel like it's on the tip of my tongue, but I know what you're talking about with the exhibitions.
And I know I did something for Frosty's online 1 year, and shout outs to Rip for hooking me up with a bunch of opportunities doing ICFC randomly, exhibitions, finals, like random weeks. So that was always fun. So even though like there wasn't a lot of paid, I guess, commentary opportunities for me, I managed to like find things here and there. And in terms of commentary in general, I think a bunch of new faces you see now came up through online events, right? Because you need somebody to commentate your online event, and when there's a million of them happening, you're gonna start having to find new people to do stuff. So like like Foxhound and Justice Spirit doing their stuff, the Florida events and the Spirit Realm and stuff like that. You definitely have a new crop of decent commentators. I'm not going to give them too much credit. They gotta do a little bit more work offline before I'm going to say they're great. But both of those two have actually talked to me before about getting better at commentary, trying to get opportunities and stuff. But that's another thing. You know, you had good players come up, good competitors come up from COVID stuff as a necessity and doing and getting the practice and the reps. And now you also had new commentators come up because of online stuff. But for me, offline is the same it was everything. It's just like, I want to win. Depends on how motivated I get. Definitely my motivation with the game takes tips and valleys. So like if I'm not motivated and I do poorly, it doesn't hurt as much as that if I'm trying to do really well and I lose, then I take that a lot harder. As opposed to some people that every loss they take pretty hard. But just day to day, you know what? Like going into ECT where I got second to Anakin, I was trying to be really motivated and I was just like, you know what? I want to try to do really well here at this event, and even if I don't, I still have that backup of doing commentary at that event too. So at least in my region, I feel like I still carry a certain degree of respect. And I think part of that is that, again, since for almost 20 years now, I've maintained a certain level of competitiveness. Like the players have gotten better, but I'm still in the same placings in terms of tournaments as I ever was before. And I think that's obvious. You know, when you consider that everybody's gotten better, that means I have gotten better. People maybe don't respect the amount of effort it takes to maintain your spot, even if it's not the top spot. Like saying something like, you know, if I said for like the last 10 years, you would find me in top 16 or top 8 of a bracket. I feel like that's a level of accomplishment that,
Certainly.
you know.
Yeah. Just
and then
having that
in terms of commentary, to this day, I think I'm still one of the top voices in my region, at least, at the very least. So like, people think of Northeast Tekken commentary, I hope they think of me. So
Right.
to an extent, so.
And I'm sure a lot of people would. I know that, as I was saying, you're definitely one of the most consistent voices that I've heard on a lot of those streams. And sort of just in the spirit of looking ahead and in the spirit of the name of the series, The Next Battle, how are you feeling about the next battle going into Tekken 8? And I'll sort of break this up into two different divisions here between the game itself and the community. So just first, could you tell me a bit about how you feel about what they've shown of the game so far in terms of game mechanics and the roster? And I know we're all hoping to see a bit more this weekend in Amsterdam, but just give me your thoughts about that from what we know.
Well, for me, it's like always like I look at it, and I don't know if I'm an outlier here, but I always look at it as there's part of me that's always been a Tekken fan, and then there's part of me that's a competitor. And I think a lot of people that have been looking at Tekken 8 footage right now have been looking at it too closely. They've been trying to dissect it a little bit too much as a competitor side. And for me as a fan, I'm like, this looks sick. Right. Like that. Obviously, I don't know if they're using. I don't know if they confirmed or not if they're using Unreal 5. But if it's Unreal 4, then it's amazing. What next level of quality, at least in terms of like the cinematics and the in-game footage they've shown so far. I think aesthetically, the new rage mechanic looks great. Like that, like it's different for different characters. Like obviously, you know, people were talking about the Jin 442 dash cancels and stuff like that. But then I'm looking at Jack and I'm like, bro, this dude's hitting you with forward 2 and then throwing down some missiles and shit. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And then
I can definitely attest to being a really big fan of Jack's new design and everything involved with that.
And then King's wall splatting you and that thing's exploding like it's DOA and stuff's happening over there. But then again, as the competitor, I'm like, okay, you know, obviously like Fee had that video where he came out and he had his apprehensions, and it's like, sure, you know, if you're looking at it in terms of the how the history of Tekken 7 balancing is going, I can understand being apprehensive, and that's completely valid. But again, it's like don't be pessimistic early, I guess. There's lots of time to be pessimistic once you've actually interacted and seeing how the final product is, right? You don't want to be a downer going into it. I feel like it's that I want to be cautiously optimistic going into a new product, which is what the game is, right? It's new commercial product. I want to try and like enjoy what I see so far. I want to enjoy seeing Law, like roided up Law with the nunchucks and stuff, and weird Paul with the haircut. Like, I guess some of the designs are like the new Paul haircut is weird. But
Yeah.
like Lars looks cool, Jack looks cool, King looks cool, Jin and Kazuya looks cool. John looks like John, I guess. They didn't really touch her design too much. But turns out all I'm thinking about as a competitor right now is put Heihachi in.
Right.
I know he's supposed to be dead, but Kazumi was dead in the story before the end of Tekken 7 story ended, and you put her in the game, so she's a dead character. So you could put Heihachi in. There's precedent for that at that point.
Well, that was actually sort of one of the things I wanted to ask about as well. Before we talk a bit about community evolution, is there anything in particular, whether it's roster or your thoughts on how they made changes to Tekken 7, that looking at Tekken 8, you're like, they could finally do this. It's a new product. They could do this with the roster or with how different stuff works. Do you have any particular thoughts about that?
I've always been a fan of starting ever since we've gotten into the realm of like expansions and fighting games and stuff like that. Like I guess starting with Street Fighter 4. I've always been a fan of having a very small, not a very small, but a reasonably small base roster and expanding it through there. Like obviously now we're in terms of paid DLC. I wish it was more like I wish the way it works in Tekken 8 is we have this small roster and the characters are free, like Melty Blood does it. We release characters semi-regularly and they're free. And with all the customization and stuff in the game, I feel like Namco should just monetize the aesthetic part of the game. And if you want a new costume, that's $1, or if you want a really cool headpiece or something like that, or a new life bar or something, like nickel and dime people that way. I don't like having paid characters behind a paywall like that. Or at the very least, the least they could do is when you have new characters come out, let them be playable in training mode.
Right.
Even if you don't own them. But I want like a very small base roster, like the way Tekken 7 originally came out, which I think was... Well, arcade was like 16 characters, and then when it came out on console, I want to say it was closer to 30. I say 24 to 30. 24 I feel like is a good release size. Yeah, even, because Tekken 7 now, we broke 50, I think. I think we're at 51? Mm-hmm. 50, 51, I think now.
Depends on how
and
you get the banner.
I think starting with that many characters in a one-on-one game is way too much. Mm-hmm. You're going to have way too many people that gravitate toward whatever's top tier and stuff, and there's going to be way less experimentation. Much rather have a game that slowly adds new characters, and then people can grow with the game and not get overwhelmed over time. And I understand some people are going to be upset that their favorite isn't in the game. I can't relate to that because, like, for a long time, I enjoyed so many characters in Tekken, at least on an aesthetic level. So I was like, for me, I'm confident that even if Leo, Marduk, Horong, Heihachi, not in the game, I could still find another character to play that I would enjoy. Like, I'll just play Paul, or maybe I'll find Law and finally learn how to do DSS correctly, or maybe not Jin or Kazuya, they're kind of whack.
Still a Mishima. That training still to use.
Still a Mishima, so the skill set will carry over. But I'm confident that even if none of the characters I currently play in the game, I could still find a character that I would jive with in terms of things.
Now, in terms of just the community and how things look right now at what we can probably conclude as the tail end of Tekken 7. And I know, like, looking at TWT this year and considering like another World Tour, it might be a bit foggy there. But it feels like we can pretty comfortably say this is sort of a transitional period to the next game. How are you feeling about the community side of things and how things have grown or still have the potential to grow?
I'm actually amazed at the level of retention that we've still had in Tekken 7. It feels like, if anything, maybe COVID online stuff helped the player base even grow a little bit more. As much as people complain about the net play, definitely Season 4 was better than things, even though, I do agree it got randomly worse from that initial Season 4 release. I will say it's better than it was in Season 2 and Season 1. They did improve the input delay. The online is miles better. I feel like people are looking at, when they say Tag 2 was better, I feel like people are looking at it with rose-colored glasses, because at its worst, Tag 2 online was very, very bad. And don't even talk about DR Online or Tekken 6 Online. That's even awful as well. So, the big thing for me is that historically, you get this long into a game's life cycle, and a lot of people just fall off, and you see new people win events only because the old guard, quote unquote, has decided to stop playing for whatever reason. Like, the best player, like, in another game, in another time, in an earlier time, I would say, like, whatever that game's Anakin or Jimmy was, they would just stop entering because of boredom or whatever, because they just get bored, and then that's why you would see new names at the top of the list. But I feel year over year, Tekken 7, for all of the complaints that people have about it, it has managed, I feel like, to grow in terms of competitors. Like, if you're just going by Evo numbers, I would guess, like, 2022's Evo, I feel like, dropped off a little bit compared to 2019, but still, like, that level of player retention is unheard of in the older generation of fighting games. And we have so many players now that are interested in playing the game and have, because of Discord, Twitter, YouTube, have learned how to play the game so fast, and that are already good now. And it used to be the way it was that your first Tekken game, you kind of suck the whole way through, and you're just learning how to play Tekken to be good for the next Tekken game. But so many people that have started with this Tekken have gotten so, at the very least, competent, if not amazing at it, that I can't wait to see how it's going to look when we go dive right into Tekken 8 and we have this flourishing player base. Like, unless Tekken 8 is so different or so objectively bad that it turns off so many people, I feel like we can only go up from here. And now we're going to be looking at like 1, 2, maybe even 3,000 people at an Evo or a big event like that. It's like, it boggles my mind the amount of potential growth we have in the scene.
Yeah, and I think it was, I believe it was Combo Breaker that I had just seen an early registration list, like Rick likes to put up, of what games are leading, and Tekken was right up there. And I feel like over the years, it's always been all of us, like, just cheering from the back, like, yeah, Tekken represent. And it's really been nice to see that, as you said, just grow over time. But in terms of personal growth, just to wrap us up here, is there anything else that you might like to add about how you feel you've grown through Tekken 7's lifespan, or just through, competitive Tekken in general?
I mean, Tekken 7 has been pretty good to me. I've done relatively well in a bunch of events offline. I managed to win NEC back there. Like I said, even recently, I did second at ECT. I only lost to Anakin 2 times in bracket, which is, in my eyes, I like to joke about, like, bro, I lost to Anakin 2 times. I basically won the event. Like, I lost to, like, the secret boss of North American Tekken at that point, right? And even then, I took a couple of games and had a few strong rounds against him as well. So I always feel open. Like, you never stop getting better. Like, I feel like if you feel like you've hit a wall, like, or a plateau, like, plateauing is the hardest point, where it's like you feel like it's so hard to get to that next level as a player. Like, it's so easy when you're just learning, man. You're like, learning how to punish one move or something like that makes you win so many more games. But like, once you get as far as you and I have, it's like you're making those like incremental gains for like incremental progress. It can be kind of frustrating when you're not seeing big progress, but when you've been as long as I have been in the game, it's like I'm always learning new things. I'm forgetting things and then I'm learning them again. Like, even for commentary, there's always something that I can do better. I can be a little bit more entertaining, a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more succinct with the points that I'm trying to convey, trying to work with my commentary partners, another dynamic that I didn't even talk about earlier, just like learning how to figure out, like, commentary partners are like their own matchup in their self, like trying to figure out what this guy wants to do and trying to help him flourish, trying not to get in his way or just trying to not have him get in your way. But I still like Tekken, man. Like, even when I complain when I lose or when I don't want to play for months on end, like, it's fine. Like, especially, again, another great point about the game being so popular and flourishing. Like, back then, like Tekken 5, Tekken 6, even Tag 2, like there was such a pressure on me regionally to like enter events and support the scene because I felt like if I didn't, like if this guy that's been around so far doesn't enter and doesn't play, I feel like it just sets a bad vibe right now at that point. But now the game has gotten so big that's like, man, people don't care about whether I enter or not. If I leave and never play Tekken again, I feel comfortable that the scene is just going to keep going without me. And that honestly, that feels to an extent that feels good.
Mhm.
That the scene has gotten so self-sustained. It's reached that level of critical momentum that I feel like like Jimmy's gone, and people say, "Where's Jimmy nowadays?" But it's like game kept going without him, right? Like it would take something big, like I would even struggle to say like if Nee decided to not play Tekken 8, I feel like the game would just keep going without him at that point. Like it sounds disrespectful to an extent to say that way, but like I said, I feel like the game has reached that level of critical mass where it's like it's not dependent on any one person anymore, and that's good for the scene. You know, and then like I said earlier, unless they do something really bad, unless they really fumble the ball with Tekken 8, I feel like it can only keep gaining momentum going forward. And if I want to step away from the game for months or a year and then come back, I can do that now. And I would encourage other people that if you're burnt out on Tekken 7, leave and come back when you're ready. The game will be here for you. The scene will be here for you when you decide to re-engage with the game. And it's not as hard to get back into it as it may seem. Like especially once you have that level of muscle memory, you're a couple of weeks, a couple of months, you're gonna get right back into the swing of things. So, you know, take that mental break now. We're in that down period, we're in that transitional period, as you said. And, you know, when you wanna come back to Tekken 7 or even Tekken 8, it'll be here for you. And that's the coolest part for me now. And that's the most part that I'm thankful for the Tekken community. Like, thank you for everybody for liking my game so much that you've basically taken the burden off my shoulders to carry it, like figuratively. And you know, if I want to take a break, or you want to take a break, or anybody does that, you know, like I said, take that break, come back, and we'll all be here waiting for you.
Yeah, well, I
That's
think
super cool.
a lot of us are certainly thankful that you've stuck around for the years that you have in this community. And again, thank you for being a wonderful guest today on the show.
Mhm.
I'm very glad that we were able to talk. And everybody, be on the lookout for Bloodhawk in future tournaments and on the commentary desk. And I guess, you know, as we prepare for the next battle, we'll see what Tekken 8 has in store for all of us. But thank you again, Bloodhawk, for joining me today for this episode of The Next Battle.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Bye, everyone.